The edge of the galaxy was supposed to be a place of quiet. Outposts here, nestled among ancient nebula and uncharted voids, were bastions of research and observation, but on this day, tranquility died. Above the icy surface of Enceladus Prime, the rift appeared without warning, a jagged scar of pulsating light, stretching across the heavens like an open wound. The research station sensors screamed with warnings, but their human operators had no frame of reference for what was unfolding. It was not a meteor shower, not an anomaly from the nearby star. This was something primal, something alive. Commander Elias Ward stood on the bridge of the ES of Resolute, his graying hair reflecting the starlight filtering through the viewport. He was supposed to be retired, living peacefully in the Mars colonies with his daughter. Yet here he was again, summoned by the High Council to command an investigation fleet. The peace humanity had forged among the stars seemed to be fraying, and Ward's gut told him today would make that undeniable. "Report," he barked, his voice steady despite the growing unease gnawing at him. "Sir, the rift is emitting chronometric radiation levels off the scale," said Lieutenant Garin, his face pale. "It's like time itself is unraveling around it. Nearby satellites are reporting distortions in their clocks. Some are moving backward." Before Ward could respond, the rift changed. Its edges rippled and expanded, glowing brighter, almost impossibly so. From within, shapes began to emerge, shimmering forms that defied classification. They were humanoid, yet translucent, their forms flickering like flames caught in an eternal wind. A dozen of them floated forward, their movements deliberate, their presence exuding power. A voice echoed across every comm channel, every frequency. It was both deafening and faint, as if spoken from the depths of time itself. "You have trespassed where you do not belong. The Infinis weave is broken. Humanity must cease." The Resolute's crew froze, eyes locked on the beings hovering beyond the rift. Ward's heart sank. The voice carried no malice, only inevitability, a pronouncement of judgment. "Are we picking up any signs of weapons?" he asked, breaking the silence. "No, sir," Garin replied, his fingers flying over his console. "No energy signatures. Wait." The beings raised their hands in unison, and suddenly the starfield behind them warped. Colonies listed in the star charts began blinking out, their names vanishing from every screen. "They're erasing systems," shouted Garin. 12 colonies just disappeared from history. Ward clenched his fists. "Open a channel," he ordered. The comm officer hesitated but complied. "Channel open, sir." "This is Commander Elias Ward of the United Earth Fleet," he said, his voice firm. "We demand to know your intent. Why attack innocent lives?" The response was instantaneous. "Humanity's existence destabilizes the continuum. For the sake of all timelines, you must be undone." As the rift widened, Ward turned to his crew. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We need to get this intel back to Earth." But as the Resolute began to retreat, Ward knew one thing with certainty. Humanity had just become part of a war it couldn't yet comprehend. The ESS Resolute limped back to Sol space, its systems barely functional after the encounter. Elias Ward stood in the war room of Luna Base Alpha, the holographic display flickering before him. Around the table sat humanity's brightest minds, admirals, scientists, and diplomats, none of whom looked ready for what was to come. Admiral Lena Voss, her sharp features framed by her cobalt officer's uniform, gestured at the rift's projection. "This is a threat we cannot afford to face unprepared." Those beings erased 12 colonies as if they never existed. If they target Earth or Sol itself, it's over. "And what exactly are we supposed to do about it?" snapped Fleet Marshal Renault, his tone edged with frustration. "Fight gods with missiles and plasma cannons." Ward leaned forward, his voice cutting through the cacophony. "We don't have the luxury of defeatist rhetoric, Marshal. The Aeontides claim we've destabilized the continuum. If that's true, They won't stop at Sol. They'll erase every trace of us, down to the first humans who walked Earth. The room fell silent. Dr. Kayla Merrick, the chief of temporal sciences, broke the quiet. There's one potential way to fight them, though it's untested. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her apprehension. We've been developing experimental technology to shield against temporal anomalies. We call it the Temporal Stabilization Array. If we retrofit our fleet with these arrays, we might be able to resist their erasure tactics. Might? Renault scoffed. We can't gamble the survival of humanity on a might. We don't have another choice, Ward countered, his tone steely. If this technology gives us even a fraction of a chance, we take it. What's the alternative? Sit here and wait to vanish. The room erupted into debate, but Voss silenced them with a raised hand. Enough. We've wasted enough time arguing. Dr. Merrick, prepare the arrays. Commander Ward, you'll oversee the fleet's retrofitting. Your mission is clear. Intercept the Aeon Tides and gather intelligence. We need to know exactly what they're capable of. 2 weeks later, the Temporal Vanguard stood ready. A fleet of 20 ships, each outfitted with stabilization arrays that shimmered with quantum flux, assembled near Jupiter's orbit. The Resolute, now serving as the flagship, led the formation. Ward paced the bridge, the tension in the air palpable. "Status report," he ordered. "All systems green," Lieutenant Guerin replied. "Stabilization fields are active and holding steady." Dr. Merrick appeared on the main display, her lab buzzing with activity in the background. "Commander, this mission is critical. The arrays will protect you from temporal erasure, but prolonged exposure to the Aeon Tide's energy fields could destabilize them. Be cautious." Ward gave a curt nod. "Understood. We'll bring you back answers, Doctor. Ward out." As the Vanguard approached the Tempest's verge, a chaotic expanse near the rift where time flowed erratically, the comms officer spoke up. "Sir, we're picking up something on the edge of the rift. Multiple signatures inbound." "Prepare for engagement," Ward commanded. The first Aeon Tide constructs emerged, a fleet of translucent, shimmering vessels that defied geometry. The room filled with tension as their forms twisted unnaturally, radiating energy that warped the space around them. "Stabilization fields holding," Guerin reported, though his voice was tight with stress. Ward stood tall, his gaze locked on the display. "Let's see if humanity can fight back against gods. Open fire." The Vanguard's first salvo launched, piercing the void with streaks of light. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The ESS Resolute bucked and trembled as the first wave of Aeon Tide constructs responded. Their attacks weren't conventional weapons. They were disruptions, waves of shimmering light that twisted reality, causing parts of the ship to flicker as if teetering between existence and nothingness. "Stabilization fields holding at 80%, Lieutenant Guerin yelled over the alarms. Elias Ward gripped the edge of the command console, his knuckles white. "Divert auxiliary power to the arrays. Keep them stable." Outside the viewport, the Temporal Vanguard ships fired in unison, their weapons blazing as coordinated bursts of energy slammed into the Aeon Tide vessels. Some enemy constructs shattered into brilliant modes of light, but others adapted, their forms shifting into even stranger geometries. "They're learning," Dr. Kayla Merrick's voice cut in from the comms. Her holographic form appeared on the bridge, hands moving rapidly over a console. "Their constructs are evolving to counter our weapons. We have minutes, not hours." Ward clenched his jaw. "We'll give you those minutes. All ships, focus fire on the lead construct. Break their formation." The Vanguard's coordinated assault bought them precious time, but Ward's gut told him something was wrong. The Aeon Tides weren't retreating. They were advancing, deliberately drawing the fleet toward the heart of the rift. "Commander," Guerin called out, his voice shaky, "I'm detecting a massive temporal energy spike directly behind us." Before Ward could issue a command, the ES Horizon, a smaller frigate trailing behind the Resolute, exploded into a burst of cascading light. Its destruction wasn't physical. It was as if the ship had been erased, its existence undone in a flash of warped time. Damn it! Ward slammed his fist on the console. Pull back to defensive positions. They're hurting us. Hours later, after the Vanguard managed to disengage and regroup near a debris field, the Resolute's crew took stock of the damage. 3 ships were gone, wiped from reality with no survivors. Morale was low, but there was little time for grief. Ward entered the war room, where Dr. Merrick waited alongside Admiral Lena Voss, who had joined them remotely. The tension between them was palpable. "They're too coordinated," Ward said, leaning over the tactical display. "Every move they make feels deliberate, as if they know our plans before we do. It's more than just advanced strategy." Merrick hesitated, her eyes darting to the display. "Commander, I've been reviewing the data we recovered from the first engagement. There's a pattern in their tactics, one that suggests—" She paused. "Suggests what?" Ward pressed. Merrick sighed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It suggests they've had access to our command codes." Ward froze, the weight of her words hitting him like a blow. "You're saying someone on the inside is feeding them information?" Admiral Voss's hologram bristled. "Are you suggesting there's a traitor in the Vanguard? That's impossible." "Not impossible," Ward said grimly, his mind racing. "Only improbable, and in this war, improbable doesn't mean safe." Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Ward replayed the mission logs, searching for any clue of sabotage. The patterns were subtle, too subtle for any ordinary enemy to exploit. Someone within their ranks had to be working against them. As he stared at the data, a faint notification blinked on his console. An unauthorized transmission had been sent moments before the Vanguard's retreat. The source? A secure terminal aboard the ESS Resolute itself. Ward's stomach sank. The traitor wasn't just among the fleet. They were on his ship. He activated his comm. "Lieutenant Guerin, lock down all outgoing transmissions and get Dr. Merrick to the bridge. We're about to have a very difficult conversation." Somewhere in the shadows of the fleet, the saboteur prepared to strike again. And this time, humanity's survival might depend on Ward uncovering the truth before it was too late. The ESF Resolute drifted through the Tempest verge, the edges of the rift stretching like a dark wound in the fabric of space. Ward stood at the command console, his eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the readings. The traitor aboard his ship was still unknown, but the imminent threat of the Aeontides forced him to focus on the battle ahead. Every passing moment felt like a step closer to total annihilation. Dr. Kayla Merrick entered the bridge, her expression grim. "Commander, we've analyzed the Aeontide weapon we recovered from the last engagement. It's not just a weapon, it's a temporal anchor." Ward turned to her, brow furrowed. "A temporal anchor? What does that mean?" Merrick stepped forward, tapping a holographic display to bring up a schematic. "It allows them to target specific moments in time and anchor them to the present. What we're dealing with isn't just a weapon, it's an instrument of time manipulation capable of rewriting history in real time. They're erasing entire worlds and histories with it." Ward's mind raced. The implications were staggering. "Are you saying they can alter the past, erase us before we even existed?" Merrick nodded somberly. "Yes, Commander. They can erase events, reverse actions, and remove us from the timeline altogether." A cold chill ran down Ward's spine. The war wasn't just for survival, it was a war for their very existence. The Aeontides weren't just attacking them, they were attempting to unmake humanity from the beginning of time. "We can't let them keep this weapon," Ward said, determination flooding his voice. "We'll need to go into the rift itself and destroy it." Hours later, the Vanguard fleet found themselves drawn closer to the heart of the Tempest verge, where the rift pulsed with an ominous glow. Ward and his crew had come up with a plan, one that involved infiltrating the heart of Aeon-Tide territory and destroying their temporal anchor before they could rewrite more of humanity's history. The operation was dangerous, a suicide mission in the eyes of many, but it was their only chance. The fleet moved in tight formation, every ship's shields glowing with the faint hum of the temporal stabilization arrays. The air was thick with anticipation, the crew acutely aware that they were about to venture into the very heart of the rift, where time itself was fragile. As they entered the rift, reality seemed to warp around them. The stars twisted into spirals of light, galaxies flickered in and out of existence, and the crew felt disoriented, as though they were no longer entirely sure of the present moment. The temporal vanguard ship rocked violently, as if time itself was bending against them. "Stabilization arrays at 60%, Garen reported, his voice strained. "We're in the eye of the rift. I don't know how much longer these systems can hold." "Keep it steady," Ward said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We're almost there." Ahead of them, the Aeon-Tide stronghold loomed, an imposing structure made of shifting light and shadow, its form barely comprehensible to the human eye. This was where the temporal anchor was housed, and where humanity's future could be unmade if they failed. As the vanguard moved closer, the first wave of Aeon-Tide defenders emerged, sleek, glowing ships that appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. They didn't move through space in the traditional sense. Instead, they shifted between moments, reappearing at unpredictable angles, forcing the vanguard to fire on instinct. "Return fire," Ward commanded. "Disrupt their temporal fields. Target the ships as they materialize." The battle was unlike anything Ward had ever experienced. Time seemed to fracture around them, and every shot fired had the potential to either undo their victory or open a paradox that would collapse their reality. Yet, even as they fought, the true horror of the situation became clear. Each time they struck an Aeon-Tide ship, it didn't just vanish. It was erased from the timeline, wiped from existence as though it had never been. Ward watched as one of his ships, the U.S. Fury, materialized out of nowhere in a split-second moment of clarity, only to be struck by an Aeon-Tide blast and then blink out of existence, as if it had never been a part of the fleet at all. "Garen," Ward shouted, struggling to maintain his composure. "We need more time." But there was no answer. Time itself was slipping away, and they were running out of moments. The ESS Resolute was caught in the eye of a temporal storm, its stabilization arrays flickering under the strain. Ward stood at the command console, gritting his teeth as his ship and the Vanguard fleet were assailed from all sides by the Aeon-Tide ships, each of them blinking in and out of existence with terrifying precision. The battlefield was no longer a defined space. It was a collection of fractured moments, each one threatening to unravel the Vanguard's progress. "Commander," Lieutenant Garen shouted over the chaos. "We've lost contact with half the fleet. They're being erased from the timeline as we speak." Ward clenched his fists, frustration building. "We can't lose any more ships. Get us closer to the heart of that structure. The anchor is our only chance." But even as he gave the order, Ward knew that time was working against them. The U.S. Fury, their closest ally in the Vanguard, had vanished from their sensors, wiped from the timeline, leaving nothing behind but a faint ripple of disturbed space. The crew of the Fury was gone, erased. It was a bitter reminder that every moment in this war was precarious. As they neared the Aeon-Tide stronghold, the rift seemed to tighten around them, warping reality further. The stars flickered and vanished, replaced by the distorted light of impossible geometries that twisted in on themselves. The Resolute bucked again, this time so violently that several crew members were thrown from their stations. "We're approaching the temporal anchor." Dr. Kayla Merrick's voice rang out from the communications panel. "Prepare for docking. The anchor is in the center of that structure, but we'll need to get inside if we're to destroy it." Ward nodded grimly. Get the boarding teams ready. We don't have time to waste. Moments later, Ward and a team of elite soldiers were preparing for the drop. The rift's energy was thick, clinging to them like a heavy fog as they suited up. Their destination? The heart of the Aeontide stronghold, where the temporal anchor was housed, a weapon that could unmake them all if they failed. "Commander, there's something you need to know." Dr. Merrick's voice crackled over the comms. "I've been analyzing the temporal fluctuations in the rift. It's possible that the anchor isn't just one device. There may be multiple anchors scattered across different points in time. Destroying this one may not be enough." Ward felt a cold shiver run through him. The idea that they were fighting against something far larger than they had anticipated, something that spanned the entire fabric of time itself, was almost too much to comprehend. But there was no turning back now. "Understood," Ward replied, his voice steady despite the rising dread. "We'll destroy this one, and then we'll find the rest. Let's move." The team's drop pod shot through the atmosphere of the Aeontide stronghold, the ground ahead of them shimmering as if the very laws of physics were being twisted. As they descended, the pod's hull groaned under the strain of time distortions, and the soldiers inside held on tight, knowing they would need every ounce of focus to survive what awaited them below. The pod landed with a thud, and the door hissed open. They emerged into an alien landscape, a place where time had no clear direction, only endless corridors and shattered spaces. The ground beneath their boots felt unstable, as though the very planet itself was caught in a loop, forever replaying the same moments over and over. "Stay alert," Ward ordered, his voice firm as ever. The team fanned out, their weapons ready as they advanced through the warped terrain. Ahead, the core of the Aeontide structure pulsed with a strange, otherworldly light. Ward's instincts told him that this was the heart of the temporal anchor, the place where all their efforts would either end in victory or failure. But as they moved closer, a sudden ripple in the air made them all stop. A figure appeared before them, its form indistinct, as though it existed in multiple moments at once. It was one of the Aeontides, but this one was different. It was neither fully physical nor temporal. It was a fusion of both. "You are too late," the figure's voice echoed in their minds, its words stretching across every sense. "The timeline has already been altered. You cannot stop what is already in motion." Ward's pulse quickened. If this being was right, their fight was already over before it had even truly begun. Time itself was slipping through his fingers. "You will not succeed," the Aeontide said again. Ward steadied his breath. "We'll see about that." The battle for humanity's future was only just beginning. The Aeontide figure loomed before them, an ethereal being that seemed to flicker between moments in time. Its presence was disorienting, as if the very fabric of existence couldn't quite grasp its form. Ward's pulse quickened, but his mind remained focused. He wasn't going to let this war, this existential threat, end here in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. "We'll stop you," Ward said, his voice unwavering, though the words felt like a challenge against an inevitable tide. The Aeontide's voice echoed in their minds, distorting with an unnatural timbre. "You cannot. We are the guardians of time, and time is ours to command. You, a fleeting moment in its expanse, will be erased, just as your ancestors never existed." Ward's grip tightened around his weapon, but he didn't fire. This creature wasn't just an enemy. It was the embodiment of the very thing they were fighting against, the unraveling of history, the erasure of existence. The temporal anchor they had come here to destroy wasn't just a device. It was an agent of annihilation, a tool to rewrite reality itself. "We're not just moments," Ward replied, his tone fierce. "We're humanity, and we fought too long to be wiped out." The Aeontide's form shimmered, and in an instant, the ground beneath them began to distort. The corridors of the stronghold warped, collapsing into themselves as if time itself was folding. One moment, they stood in the heart of the enemy base. The next, they were on the surface of an alien world, surrounded by ruins that seemed to stretch backward and forward across centuries. "Stay together," Ward shouted, signaling for his team to maintain formation. The temporal distortions were growing worse. The very air seemed to crack and shimmer, as if reality was being rewritten in real time. They couldn't afford to get lost in the rift. They had to destroy the anchor. Ward moved forward, his mind now clear on the singular goal. He would not let this war be decided by time itself. His team followed closely, each step forward a struggle against the disorienting effects of the rift. The Aeon-Tide figure reappeared in front of them, moving through the corridors of the stronghold like a ripple in the stream of time. Its voice reverberated, reaching deeper into Ward's mind. "You cannot defeat us. The past, present, and future are ours to control. There is no victory for you." Ward steadied his breath. His team continued forward, fighting against the distortions, stepping through moments in time as if they were walking through a dream. "Kayla," Ward said over the comms. "We're at the core. Is the charge set?" Dr. Merrick's voice crackled back, urgency in her tone. "The temporal device is in place. We need to disrupt the anchor's flow of energy, or it'll reset everything before you even reach it." Ward gritted his teeth. This was their only shot. "We'll get you the time you need. Just keep it steady." As they neared the heart of the structure, the ground beneath them trembled. The anchor was close. Ward could feel it, the pulsing, thrumming energy of a force beyond anything they had ever encountered. The very air itself seemed to bend and warp, like a sickening, pervasive pulse that made every heartbeat feel like a threat. Then they saw it, the temporal anchor. It wasn't just a machine. It was a living thing, woven together from shifting streams of light, dark matter, and the very essence of time. The structure itself twisted and bent like an ancient, forgotten temple, but it was more than just a physical object. It was an interface between existence and oblivion, a bridge that allowed the Aeon Tides to manipulate the timeline. Ward approached it cautiously, each step a battle against the chaos around them. The Aeon-Tide figure was closing in, and they were running out of time. The anchor had to be destroyed before the rift closed, before the rest of the fleet was erased, before humanity was wiped from the very timeline. A crackle of energy surged through the chamber, and the ground beneath them shook once more. The Aeon-Tide's voice filled the space. "You are too late. You will never destroy time. It is eternal, and so are we." Ward took one last step, raised his weapon, and fired. The pulse of energy hit the anchor with a blinding flash. The world around them seemed to collapse. Time itself began to fragment as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. The battle had reached its climax, and for the first time, it seemed as though humanity might stand a chance. Ward's vision blurred as if reality itself were dissolving, its edges fraying like the unraveling threads of a tapestry. The pulse of energy that had surged through the anchor echoed outward in a brilliant shockwave, warping the space around him. The very air shimmered, distorting like heat waves on a scorching desert. His ears rang with the sound of bending time, an unnatural, bone-deep vibration that made it feel as if the universe itself was holding its breath. For an instant, there was nothing. Just the profound silence of a universe frozen in place, as if all of time had paused in that fleeting moment. Ward's thoughts felt strangely disconnected from his body, and his movements sluggish, as if everything around him was slowing down. "Commander?" Lieutenant Garen's voice cut through the disorienting silence, his words distorted by the temporal shift. "Get down, there." Before Garen could finish, a pulse of dark energy exploded from the heart of the temporal anchor. The rift deepened, spreading like a crack in glass, and the space around them twisted, stretching out in impossible directions. Time collapsed inward on itself, and suddenly Ward was no longer sure where he was, or when. He stumbled backward, his breath coming in shallow gasps as the world spun. He saw flashes of distant stars, ships that flickered in and out of existence, and the faces of his crew, contorted as they struggled to remain in the present. The Aeon-Tide figure appeared once more, its form flickering like a broken hologram. It was no longer an entity of flesh and thought. It was a force of pure temporal energy, a presence beyond the understanding of any human mind. The creature extended its hand toward the shattered anchor, and the distortion around them seemed to ripple in response, like the last vestiges of a dying wave. "You dare to defy the flow of time itself." The voice, more hollow than ever, echoed in Ward's mind, vibrating through the fabric of his consciousness. "You cannot understand the power you're playing with." The anchor was never just a weapon, it was a foundation of existence itself. Ward shook his head, forcing himself to focus despite the madness swirling around him. "We don't need to understand it. We just need to destroy it." The ground beneath him cracked, and the rift grew wider. He glanced around, seeing his team struggling to hold their ground. The distortions were tearing them apart, pulling them into different moments. He saw Garen's face flicker in and out of existence, his voice coming through in broken fragments. Merrick was kneeling by the device she had planted, her hands a blur as she tried to maintain the temporal stabilization. "Kayla!" Ward shouted, but his voice was lost in the distorted air. The temporal anchor pulsed again, its energy flooding the space around them. Ward knew that if they didn't act quickly, the entire fleet, and perhaps humanity itself, would be erased from existence. They were running out of time, but something wasn't right. The anchor had absorbed the weapon's pulse, but it had not been destroyed. Instead, it had expanded, creating a new anomaly, one far more dangerous. "Commander," Merrick's voice came through the comms, her tone frantic. "The anchor is self-repairing. It's adapting to the disruption." Ward's heart sank. "Then we'll have to stop it from adapting." He turned to his team. "We need to overload the core. Every second we waste, it strengthens. Garen, cover Merrick. I'll get to the core and finish the job." But as he made his way toward the heart of the anchor, an overwhelming wave of energy hit him. The world spun violently, and Ward's legs gave way. Time shifted again. Now he was back on the Resolute's bridge, watching as the Aeon-Tide forces destroyed ship after ship. Then, just as quickly, he was standing in the middle of a war-torn city, watching his ancestors battle for survival. It was all a blur. Time was collapsing inward, and Ward felt himself being stretched thin across different realities. But amidst the chaos, one thought remained constant. He had to stop this. He had to finish what they had started. For humanity, for all of existence. And then, just as he thought he might lose himself to the rift, a voice, a single familiar voice, broke through the static of his fractured mind. "Commander, do not give up." It was Dr. Merrick. He snapped back into focus. The anchor wasn't just a weapon. It was feeding off their struggles, amplifying their doubts. Ward's resolve hardened. The anchor could warp time, but it could not erase willpower. He moved again, each step heavy but determined. There was no going back. Time would either be remade or destroyed by his hand. The rift around Ward stretched, distorting with such force that he could feel his very existence being pulled in every direction. His body ached as if time itself was trying to tear him apart, but he pushed through, every fiber of his being screaming for him to reach the heart of the temporal anchor. The war was nearing its end, but it wasn't the victory that called to him, it was survival. For him, for his crew, and for humanity's very place in history. The space around him flickered again. One moment, he was standing within the heart of the Aeon-Tide stronghold, and the next, he was back on the Resolute's bridge, watching the same battle unfold over and over again. The horrors of the conflict rewound and replayed like a broken record. "No," he whispered to himself, shaking his head. "Not again." He could see his crew in the chaos, his officers vanishing from existence, ships blinking out of the timeline. The U.S. Fury, his closest ally, gone. But Ward refused to be trapped in the cycle. He had to break free, The temporal anchor, the key to it all, was within his grasp. He stumbled forward, every step a fight against the gravitational pull of the rift. There, ahead of him, stood the temporal anchor. It was no longer just a construct. It was a manifestation of chaos itself, twisting and flickering like a dying star. Tendrils of energy lashed out from the core, sparking violently, consuming everything in its vicinity. Ward raised his weapon, a last-ditch effort to disrupt the anchor's fragile existence. He wasn't sure it would work, but he had no other choice. Kayla. Ward's voice broke through the disorienting hum of time. Can you stabilize the core? I'm trying. Merrick's voice echoed back. The anchor is repairing itself faster than I can handle it. You need to disrupt the core now. He nodded grimly, understanding. He pushed forward, ignoring the moments flashing in his mind. The endless iterations of humanity's past, present, and future, all of it collapsing as he approached the anchor. His weapon fired, the energy surging outward in a final desperate pulse. The moment the energy struck the core, everything seemed to freeze. Time itself screeched to a halt as the explosion of light and power engulfed the anchor. For an instant, there was only pure blinding white. And then, nothing. When Ward's vision cleared, the rift was gone. The temporal anchor had been destroyed, and the chaos that had torn apart spacetime itself began to recede. He felt his breath return to him, grounding him in the present moment. The fractured, twisting landscape that had surrounded him now lay still and calm. He looked around, his heart pounding in his chest. His crew, the team that had fought alongside him, stood just as they had moments before. They, too, seemed to feel the weight of time settling back into place. No more distortion, no more rift, only the silence that followed. Ward approached the remains of the anchor. It had collapsed into a swirling mass of collapsed time, now powerless. The threat was over. Did we? Ward began, the weight of the question hanging in the air. He looked up at Dr. Kayla Merrick, who was standing nearby, her face a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. I think we did, she answered softly. But the price? She trailed off, her voice heavy with the realization of what had been lost and what had been saved. Ward turned his gaze to the stars ahead. The war with the Aeon Tides was over, but the consequences of the battle would echo throughout humanity's future. The timeline was forever altered by their actions, by the choices they had made. Some might never remember the sacrifices. Others might never know the cost of their survival. But humanity, as it had always done, would rise again. As the crew of the ESS Resolute regrouped, Ward couldn't help but reflect on the battle that had just unfolded. It wasn't just a war fought across space, it was a war fought across time itself. And in the end, humanity had proven that no force, no matter how immense, could unmake them. The stars before them shone brighter now, as if even the fabric of time itself had acknowledged the resilience of the human spirit. The galaxy, for now, was safe. Ward took a long breath, the weight of his command finally settling in. Let's go home. And with that, the Resolute turned toward the distant stars, the crew ready to rebuild, to reclaim their place in a timeline that was once more their own.